It's episode 3 of the Amiga Show. Coming up, we connect the Amiga to a modern printer. We take a look back at some Amiga magazines. I play an old game. And a newer title. It's the show made on the Amiga about the Amiga. It's the Amiga Show. You get the idea. Printing technology has changed since our Amigas were in the shops. The parallel standard was replaced by USB, and so 8 and 16-bit machines often had to rely on older printers to produce an output. Whilst there are many ways to get printed output from the Amiga, they can be fiddly and time-consuming, often involving PostScript. Plus, your domestic printer is more likely to look like this, so is there a way of getting a computer like the Amiga to print on a modern device? As viewers of last month's show will have noticed, the answer is yes, with the Retro Printer by RWAP Software. This is a small USB-powered device that contains a quad-core Raspberry Pi and a small interface board or hat with a Centronics-style connector. This may look like some cybermaniacal for consenting adults, but in reality is an adapter that corrects for a build problem with the version 3 board. Newer versions will not need this. Joking aside, this unit is very well made and the case has a nice finish to it. Everything fits together very snugly. So let's plug this bad boy in. Obviously connecting it to the parallel port, and then the Centronics connector, power lead, and I'm using the Ethernet for now. The switch just turns on the hat. As I'm using this in headless mode, I first need to find the device's IP address. Smarter users will be able to configure the onboard Wi-Fi as well as setting a fixed IP address if needed. The manual makes setting up a breeze. I am not an expert, but the Linux software easily found my Wi-Fi printer, and there are many options to change output quality. One important step was to set the printer to be the default, otherwise it wouldn't print. Once this is done though, it's pretty much set and forget. Once configured, the unit waits for Epson escape control codes, renders the document to a PDF, which it then prints. Now, the quality very much depends on the drivers you have on your Amiga. Workbench drivers were not always the best, and your output is entirely dependent on the driver used. You print as you normally would. In this case, I'm using Graphicraft. The box springs into life and sends data to the printer. And it's not a bad first attempt. If you're printing text, switching between 60 and 80 column text produces output many of us will be familiar with if you've ever had a dot matrix printer. As the Retro Printer is actually rendering the output based on the Amiga driver, it will be close to the quality produced on a real printer. A printer emulator, if you like. A more preferable method in this case would be to use the text capture mode, which allows for editable documents. Switching up to Final Copy 2, quality and flexibility are improved. But do not expect miracles. The Epson driver is not up to PostScript quality. But there is a noticeable improvement, and I would imagine that this is all a bit dependent on the application being used and the settings of the Retro Printer itself. One of the excellent features is that the PDFs generated are easily accessible, allowing review of documents before committing to paper first, with the added benefit that any Amiga printout has already been turned into a PDF for later use. This is a great feature of the unit. There's a reasonably active forum too, and the creator of the Retro Printer has been on hand to offer advice. This is an ingenious printing solution which allows computers of a certain age access to modern printing technology. It may have more application in the 8-bit world, but its use across your computer collection may prove useful. No doubt we'll be seeing it again soon. Prices range from £45 for the hat to a fully configured unit for £140. For more information, go to retroprinter.com. It's January 1986. Stories were starting to appear in the UK press about the Amiga. Commodore User, the title that was to become CU Amiga, asks, who was going to buy it? They reflect that there were no cheap thrills with this hardware. Amiga World kicked off the year with an arty issue. This will be the last time I mention Andy Warhol in this show, I promise. Inside there's an interview with the man himself. He clearly does not relish the idea of being interviewed and is as enigmatic and distracted as you would imagine. Worth a read though, especially for his clear enjoyment of the machine and the technical process. The magazine goes on to interview 4 artists, their work, and their experiences of producing this new type of art. One goes on to compare the illumination from a CRT to that of a stained glass window. You can see the point. Modern displays can reduce the luster of such images. Those watching on a CRT will not need convincing. And it's an interesting showcase, a time when the Amiga was dabbling in the world of fine art, as this gallery of freelancer Roger Good illustrates. But there was a new Amiga magazine to hit the shelves. Amazing Computing from Canada ran on and off for about 14 years, and hang on a minute, this looks all a bit... I think this cheeky upstart is going to have something to say. This magazine started off very much as a fanzine, but had the advantage of being much more grassroots than Amiga World. This issue features a number of firsts for an Amiga title. It was the first time Amiga users came into contact with the term virus, and actually documents the first of a sort. The date virus was more of a bug, but showed how susceptible Amigas would be to them. More firsts would come from the rumours section. The writer of this was to be shrouded in mystery, but clearly a close Commodore source. Inside gossip from EA, as well as news on the never-released Ranger chipset, were all discussed here. It's fascinating reading. This mag clearly had connections. It's also the first publication to talk about public domain software, and has an article explaining what it is, as well as the Amicus discs. Program listings from this magazine would end up filling these now legendary discs. More on that in a minute. There's even an ad for a public domain library with 3 discs. $10 each. That's nearly an armful. It's the first time we see an advert for Marauder. This infamous disk backup utility allowed copying of specific Amiga titles, here advertised in its original issue. Discovery Software would go on to create some great Amiga games. I wonder if you could back them up with Marauder. Probably not. That was a fun read, and I look forward to more of these. It was also the first to have specific Amiga basic listings. 8-bit magazines used to be full of this stuff. I thought in my naivety that I would find Superspheres by Kelly Kaufman and run it for you. It's on Amicus Public Domain Disc 2. Let me lead you, dear viewer, into a rabbit hole that became, well, a small item about Amiga Basic. Amiga Basic was a programming language which shipped with Amigas up to Workbench 1.3 and written by Microsoft. You might know of them. The Amiga Extras disc came with Amiga Basic, and you may be familiar with some of the demos and examples that it contained. These programs showed what was possible with this flexible yet rather sluggish programming language. Amiga Microsoft not being a phrase you'll often hear. Maybe you remember this piece of music. Or maybe you tried to get it to say something.
It's the Amiga Show.
Let's change its pitch.
It's the Amiga Show.
That's it. It stays. I love it. My first stumbling block after finding Amicus Disc 2 was to actually get Superspheres to run, but no matter what configuration I tried, I got nowhere. So, begrudgingly, I thought I'd type it in. It actually didn't take that long, but was the first time I'd typed in a computer listing for many years. I also didn't trust the listing particularly, as it looked very much like it had been typeset on Mac Write, so there could easily be unintentional errors. Having done that, no joy. The listing would not even get past the second line. I was about to give up, but smarter viewers may have noticed my mistake. This was not the BASIC I was looking for, basically. Although Amiga Basic did indeed come out in late 85, there was another, previous BASIC that lasted for all of a few months. A BASIC was written by our friends at Metacomco, you remember, the guys who wrote Amiga DOS. To add to confusion, it's often referred to as Amiga Basic. However, they are in no way compatible. I couldn't even load in the file I originally typed in to Amiga Basic. So yes, I had to type it in again, begrudgingly. On opening up Amiga Basic, we're presented with a much more basic interface. I didn't get too involved with the text editing features, but it was simple enough to complete the whole listing. I'll spare you the typing. By the magic of television, I was about to run the program. Okay, I made one typo, but I was pretty happy with that. And this, dear viewer, is Kelly Kaufman's Superspheres. It's a program that draws multicoloured spheres. I suppose I should have guessed. I'm not entirely sure this listing is correct, as I think the black gaps are meant to be filled with another circle instead of overwriting the sphere with a different shade. Still, it works, and frankly, I could not have been happier. Consider yourself spared the effort. Now let's go from one work of art to another as we admire some of JoJo73's latest offerings in the gallery. This is Mind Shadow, published by Activision and produced by Interplay. Yes, that Interplay. This was actually their first game, originally arriving on the 8-bits in 1984 and brought to the Amiga in late 85, making this another of the Amiga's earliest titles. The game itself is loosely based on Robert Ludlum's book from 1980, The Bourne Identity. Yes, that Bourne Identity. As the game begins, you find yourself on a beach, after discovering a map, finding passage on a boat, which takes you to England and then ultimately Luxembourg. The game's premise is that of amnesia, a useful starting point, as this game assumes you have no knowledge of what a text adventure is, and to be honest, you may not have played one quite like this. Helpfully, there is a tutorial for the uninitiated. Unhelpfully, it makes no mention of the interface found on the 16-bit versions, but more on that later. The tutorial tells us the computer is our eyes, ears, nose, voice and hands. You tell it commands like, talk to man, like a text adventure, like many hundreds that have been made up to this point. But it goes on, telling how to examine objects, gives you a list of commands, even an example puzzle. It also places emphasis on using the think command, the game's unique feature that makes progress impossible without it as you try to restore your memory. The help system is also rather unique. Help Me Condor summons a flying bird, which then gives you some form of clue. You can only do this 3 times in a game, which as we'll see is not much of a problem as the game is quite short. As you start the game, you wake up on a beach, in unfamiliar surroundings. Not just the location, but the interface. There's a bit going on here, but with much duplication. Commands can be clicked or typed, although there are many more commands than shown. You can take and drop objects by typing take or get or drop, or by simply clicking on the graphic, although many are hidden to you before other commands are used. For example, the boat has to be examined before you find a piece of metal. What immediately strikes you is that the game feels like a step towards the point-and-click genre that we know so well. Cartoony graphics, cursor controls, illustrated inventory. All we're missing is our character on screen and some hastily ported MIDI music, and we'd be right there. Joking aside, the presentation here was groundbreaking for its time, if entirely mute. Whilst this point-and-click functionality seems interesting, the reality is this is a text adventure at heart, and text entry is clearly the way forward. It's often useful to string commands together, separated with a comma, when following directions on a map, for example. There's a nice logic to the game. Here I've loaded up on items, climbed down a rope, picked up some more items, and now I can't get back up. Fortunately, there are 10 save points, which can also be accessed via a drop-down menu. Helpful, as death is never far away. Each location has nice illustrations, if a little bit dated by today's standards, but still works in giving the game a great sense of character, although would ultimately be upstaged by a certain adventure that would be released in a few short months. Text is actually kept to a minimum, but what there is scrolls smoothly. Yes, for what is basically a text adventure, there isn't much of it. At this point I was playing the game from floppy disk and was impressed with the loading times. However, this is where I became unstuck. The biggest adventure of this game was in initially finding a version that actually worked. A couple of ADFs both had corruptions, which I attempted to stitch together, but without success. In the end, I found a WHD load version that worked fine, and was able to copy across my saves. The puzzles are not too taxing, and quite logical. Even this rusty old adventurer was able to complete it in a few sittings. The game moves along at quite a pace, and has sequences with plenty of action. If anything, it comes to a bit of an abrupt end, but at least it was satisfying and in no danger of outstaying its welcome. I would recommend this one if a bit of old school adventure intrigue takes your fancy. Just use those save states wisely. This is Magica, written by Andy Noble, converted from an Amstrad CPC game by Juan Martinez. Andy has taken this very nice single-screen platformer on the Amstrad and transformed it into an honest-to-goodness arcade-quality title on the OCS Amiga. Released in September 2020, this game sees you playing a sorceress, trying to recapture her lost spells over 50 platforming levels. The game owes much to titles like Bubble Bobble, and that's no bad thing. You transform enemies back into potions with the use of a short-range weapon. As they spin off, they can stun other enemies they come into contact with. But be careful, this stun can be short-lived. Careful timing is required to convert these stunned creatures, but the reward can be a chained bonus, a huge part of this type of game. Once all the potions are collected in time, a door opens and it's on to the next level. You meet a variety of foe as the game progresses, nicely illustrated by this animated info screen. Animated enemy info screens are awesome. The Jester is your first enemy, slightly mad movements making them unpredictable. The Knight has a shield, so is only vulnerable to your attack from behind, so to speak. The Wizard uses magic at point blank range and will kill you over and over again. The Witch flies around, but handy when used as a projectile. The Goblin is much like the Wizard, except much faster. The Demon's very aggressive, chasing after you. Ghosts travel through walls, but fun to dispatch like a boss on this level. Now the fairies don't need to be killed to complete the level, but will increase the time you have available, handy in a scrape like this, and therefore increase your end of level bonus. The action is silky smooth with beautifully coloured sprites. Able to run on a standard Amiga 500, this game looks and plays fantastically well. The music by Paul Tankard is also a slice of arcade joy. It's a skill to produce music that repeats and doesn't irritate. You can switch it off, but why? It's awesome. Although based on the Amstrad tune, this Amiga rendition elevates it to another level. See what I did there? There is just so much done well here. Your progress is saved to either your hard drive or floppy disk. This allows you to pick up your progress from any point, including lives and score. This genius move encourages you to replay older levels in order to hang on to as many lives as possible. It becomes part of the play mechanic in its own right. Both high score table and progress can be erased though, without the need to hunt down the file. In this case, my workbench root directory. Remember to quit the game to save, otherwise progress will be lost. There are plenty of other neat touches, like the way the characters move in time to the music. The shower of particles as you complete the game have a sense of physics to them. There's no pause between the game ending and restarting. You can rage quit and restart in seconds. Everything from the beautiful opening title screen to the tight controls tells you you're in good hands. 2020 saw some great releases, and this is up there with the best of them, no question. Go get it.
This is a public information announcement.
Now, before we go on, you can help the show out by swinging by our Redbubble store and grabbing yourself an Amiga Show t-shirt, a custom logo rendered on the Amiga itself. Look, these people seem happy to be wearing it, laughing at their good fortune. And yes, we are on Patreon now. This is your opportunity to support the show and its future development. You'll get early access to behind-the-scenes videos of the show, as well as tutorials and extended features. Your contribution will help to keep the Amiga Show continue to be made on the Amiga. If that interests you, head along to patreon.com/The Amiga Show for more information. Thank you. And that is it for this episode. Any thoughts about the games featured or any memories about the Amiga? You can get in contact and let me know via email. That's mail@theamigashow.com, or you can see progress on our Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook pages. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.